Chapter 3. The Weight of the Silence. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It had grown teeth. It chewed at the edges of my mind from the moment Anthony left for his strategy sessions at 7 in the morning until he returned, smelling of expensive scotch and the cold air of boardroom power, long after Shane and I had retreated to our separate corners of the mansion. Wealth, I realized, was the perfect camouflage for neglect. Anthony's business empire was expanding. He was no longer just a real estate mogul. He was a titan of industry, his face plastered on the business lift-outs of the Gleaner. He spent his weekends on golf courses in Montego Bay with men who laughed like thunder and saw women as either accessories or liabilities. "Why wasn't I invited to the gala at the Spanish court, Anthony?" I asked one Saturday morning. I was stirring a cup of tea that had gone cold, my fingers tracing the gold rim of the porcelain, another gift he'd bought to replace my chipped favorite mug from college. He didn't look up from his financial reports. "It was a stag affair, Tia. Business. You wouldn't have enjoyed the talk of interest rates and logistics. I have an MBA, Anthony. I literally spent 5 years talking about interest rates and logistics." He finally looked at me, but his eyes were like two polished stones. "That was another life. You have a different portfolio now. You manage the household. You manage Shane. That is your contribution to this partnership. I'm not a partner." The words burst out of me sharp and jagged. "I'm a ghost. You don't talk to me. You don't look at me unless you're checking to see if my dress is pressed. You spend more time with your associates than you do with your own son." Anthony set the paper down with a slow, deliberate precision that made my blood run cold. He stood up and walked toward me, his shadow stretching across the breakfast nook. "I am building a legacy," he said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. "I am ensuring that Shane never has to want for anything. I am providing a life that 99% of this island would kill for. And you sit here, in a $10 million house, complaining about attention, like a needy schoolgirl." He leaned in closer, the scent of his cologne, something sharp and metallic, filling my senses. "Do you know what people say about you, Tia? They say you're lucky. They say you hit the jackpot. Don't make them start saying you've gone mad with it. It would be a shame if I had to tell your mother you're struggling." Mentally. Later that afternoon, while Millicent had Shane in the garden, I found myself in the master suite. Anthony had left his blazer draped over the armchair, a rare slip in his usual armor of perfection. As I went to hang it up, a small embossed slip of paper fell from the inner pocket. It was a receipt from a high-end jeweler in New Kingston. My breath hitched. 1 diamond tennis bracelet, 18K white gold, 5 carats. The date on the receipt was 2 weeks ago. My heart, which had felt like a lead weight for months, gave a frantic, hopeful thump. Was this it? Was this his way of apologizing for the coldness? Perhaps the gala he'd excluded me from had been a ruse, and he was waiting for a special moment to bridge the distance between us. I tucked the receipt back into the pocket, my mind racing. I waited that night. I waited the next. I wore the silk robe he liked. I made sure the house was a sanctuary of quiet when he walked through the door. But the gift never came. A week passed, then 2. The hope turned into a slow-moving poison. I began to watch him more closely, looking for signs of a hidden life. If the bracelet wasn't for me, who was it for? Was there someone else, someone who didn't complain, someone who still had the light in her eyes that I had lost? The betrayal wasn't just the thought of another woman. It was the realization that I didn't even matter enough to be lied to. The receipt sat in his pocket like a taunt, a symbol of a reward I wasn't worthy of, or a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I was just there. A fixture. A ghost in silk haunting a house where diamonds were bought for people who hadn't yet been broken. He began to fill the house with people who weren't mine. Dinner parties became a regular occurrence, but I was the caterer, not the guest. Anthony would invite his friends, men with heavy gold watches and their much younger, surgically tightened wives. "Tia, tell them about the new nursery wing," Anthony would command, his hand resting on my shoulder. His grip was always a fraction too tight, a physical reminder of who held the reins. I would recite the facts, the Italian wallpaper, the imported crib, the climate-controlled air. The wives would nod, their eyes pitying or envious. I couldn't tell which. They talked about shopping trips to Miami and the best Botox doctors in New Kingston. When I tried to steer the conversation toward the recent elections or the shift in the global markets, Anthony would laugh, a patronizing, indulgent sound. "My Tia," he'd say to the table, always trying to keep her brain sharp. It's adorable, isn't it? But darling, let the men handle the heavy lifting. Why don't you go check if the dessert is ready? I would walk into the kitchen, my face burning, and lean against the cold industrial fridge. I could hear their laughter from the dining room. I was the punchline. I was the little wife who didn't know her place. I looked at my bare wrist, thinking of the diamond bracelet hidden somewhere in his study. I realized then that in Anthony's world, beauty and jewelry weren't expressions of love. They were payments for compliance. And clearly, I hadn't earned mine yet. I started to lose my voice. Literally. Sometimes days would go by where the only person I spoke to was the nanny, Millicent. But even Millicent looked at me with a guarded expression. Anthony paid her salary, a generous one, and she knew where her loyalty had to lie. "Miss Tia, you eat some food, eh?" she'd say, watching me pick at a salad. "You getting thin like a reed. Mr. Anthony won't like that." Everything was framed through what Anthony would like. I began to spend hours in the bathtub, the water as hot as I could stand it, trying to feel something, anything, other than the crushing weight of the silence. I would look at Shane playing on the rug, and a terrifying thought would creep into my mind. He doesn't even know who I am. He only knows the woman who holds him and cries. Anthony was winning. He had retired my career, refined my friends, and now he was erasing my spirit. I was becoming a decorative feature of the Sterling estate, as silent and stationary as the statues in the garden. The Architect's Inventory, a lost chapter. The leather in my office smelled of success, a blend of expensive hide, mahogany oil, and the crisp ozone scent of the air purifier. It was the smell of a man who had conquered the chaos of the Kingston streets and built a fortress above them. I leaned back in my chair, swirling a glass of 25-year-old Appleton estate. From this height in Jack's Hill, the city looked like a circuit board, and I was the one soldering the connections. I heard the faint, distant sound of Shane crying 2 floors away. I frowned. Tia should have that under control, I thought. That is what I paid the nanny for. That is why I freed her from the office. People didn't understand the weight of being a provider. They saw the cars and the country club memberships, but they didn't see the mental tax of maintaining an empire. Tia certainly didn't. Lately, she had become difficult. Not loud, she didn't have the spirit for that anymore, but heavy. She moved through the house like a damp fog, chilling the air of my success. I had done everything right. I had rescued her from that dead-end marketing firm where men with half my intellect stared at her legs. I had given her a name that opened every door in Jamaica. I had turned her into a Sterling. "She doesn't appreciate the silence," I murmured to the empty room. I remembered the way she used to look. Vibrant, yes, but unpolished. I had refined her. I had curated her wardrobe, thinned out her friends who were nothing but anchors dragging her back to mediocrity, and given her the ultimate status, motherhood without the struggle. And yet she looked at me with those vacant, accusing eyes. As if my ambition were a crime. As if the gold cage I built for her wasn't better than the dirt she'd come from. I pulled up my private banking app. The numbers were beautiful, symmetrical. I had just closed the Portmore development deal, and the commission alone could buy a fleet of the cars Tia used to drive. I thought about the diamond bracelet sitting in my safe. I hadn't given it to her yet. She didn't deserve it. She hadn't smiled properly in weeks, and I wasn't in the business of rewarding bad behavior. I would wait until she performed better at the upcoming gala. A wife was like a high-end property. She required maintenance, yes, but she also had to yield a return on investment. She had to represent the brand. "Anthony?" Her voice had drifted into my thoughts earlier that day. She had asked for more. More what? More talk? More time? I gave her the most precious thing a man like me had. My protection. In a country that could be as volatile as a tropical storm, I was her anchor. If she felt erased, it was only because she was finally being integrated into something greater than herself. I checked my watch. 10 p.m. She would be in bed by now, probably pretending to sleep so she wouldn't have to acknowledge my late return. She didn't realize that I preferred the silence. It allowed me to think. It allowed me to build. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the south. The horizon was black, the sea a hidden monster in the dark. I felt a flicker of something. Not guilt, I didn't possess the hardware for that, but a slight annoyance. There was a crack in the perfection of my life, a soft spot in the foundation. Tia was the only part of my world I couldn't quite automate. I'll talk to her mother tomorrow, I decided, sipping the last of the rum. The girl needs a hobby, or perhaps another child, something to keep her hands busy so her mind stops wandering. I felt satisfied with the solution. I was a man of action, an architect of destiny. I'd built a world where everything had its place, and Tia's place was exactly where I had put her. I turned off the office light, the click echoing in the vast, expensive emptiness of the house. I had no idea that while I was calculating the cost of her maintenance, she was already calculating the cost of her escape. I went to bed confident in my ownership, never realizing that the one thing I couldn't buy was the one thing I had already destroyed. Chapter 4. The Mirror Breaks. The mirrors in the Sterling mansion were everywhere, floor-to-ceiling glass in the foyer, gilded Victorian frames in the hallways, and the vast, cruel expanse of the master's suite. Anthony liked to see himself reflected in his success. I, however, had started to avoid them. When I did catch a glimpse, I didn't see the woman who had graduated top of her class at UWI. I saw a hollowed-out sculpture, a Stepford version of a Jamaican wife, polished until she was transparent. The psychological warfare had moved from subtle dismissal to active erosion. Anthony began to correct me in front of Shane, who was now a toddler, beginning to mimic the world around him. "No, Shane," Anthony would say, his voice tight with fake patience when the boy reached for me. "Mummy is tired today. Mummy is always tired, isn't she? Come to Daddy. Daddy has the strength." He was stealing the light in my son's eyes, teaching him that I was a fragile, failing thing. One Tuesday evening, the heat in Kingston was stifling, even with the central air humming its expensive tune. Anthony came home later than usual, the smell of expensive gin and new money clinging to his skin like a second suit. "We're hosting the board members of the Kingston Harbor project on Friday," he announced, tossing his keys onto the marble console. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I want you to wear the emerald dress. And for God's sake, Tia, try to have a conversation that doesn't involve the weather or the nanny's problems." "I don't want to host, Anthony," I said softly. My voice felt like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "I'm not feeling well. My head, it's been pounding for days." He stopped. He didn't come over to touch my forehead. He didn't ask if I needed a doctor. He simply looked at me with a cold, clinical disgust. "You're not feeling well because you do nothing, Tia. Stagnant water breeds mosquitoes. You sit in this house eating my food, spending my money, and you have the audacity to be tired? Do you have any idea how hard I work to keep this roof over your head?" "I never asked for this roof," I screamed. The sound shocked me. It was the first time I'd raised my voice in a year. "I had a roof. I had a life. You took it. You retired me like an old horse and put me in a stable." Anthony didn't flinch. He walked toward me, his pace slow and predatory. He didn't hit me. Anthony was too refined for bruises that could be seen, but he leaned in until his breath was hot against my ear. "You had a life of middle management mediocrity," he hissed. "I gave you a kingdom, and if you can't play the part of the queen, I'll find someone who can. You think you're irreplaceable? Look in the mirror, Tia. You're fading. You're a ghost, and nobody remembers a ghost once the lights come on." He walked away, leaving me trembling in the hallway. I looked at the mirror then. He was right. I was translucent. I could see the wallpaper through my own skin. The friends Anthony surrounded himself with were his mirrors, men who valued women only as extensions of their own ego. I saw him one night at the club he frequented, a place I'd practically had to beg the driver to take me to under the guise of surprising my husband. I watched through the glass partition of the VIP lounge. Anthony was surrounded by 3 men and 2 women, women who looked like the old me, sharp, laughing, professional. He was leaning in, showing them something on his phone, his face lit with a genuine warmth I hadn't seen in 3 years. He wasn't cheating in the way people usually meant. He was cheating on my soul. He was giving his respect, his intellect, and his joy to strangers, while saving only his contempt for the woman who carried his name and his child. I realized then that there was no coming back. I had spent 3 years trying to fill a vessel that was intentionally cracked. He didn't want a wife, he wanted a void he could fill with his own greatness.